As you well know, any thought can be expressed in a number of ways. The wording of an interview question will determine how much information you receive and how useful that information is in making a hiring decision. Human resource professionals must appreciate the role of well-worded interview questions in the selection process, and learn how to develop the best possible interview questions to ensure the right selection decision is made. Now let's explore additional types of interview questions that can be used. By definition, open-ended questions require full, multiple-word responses. The answers generally lend themselves to discussion and result in information upon which the interviewer can build additional questions. Open-ended questions encourage applicants to talk, allowing the interviewer the opportunity to actively listen to responses, assess verbal communication skills, and observe the applicant's pattern of nonverbal communication. It also allows the interviewer to plan subsequent questions. Hypothetical questions are based on anticipated or known job-related tasks. The questions are phrased in the form of problems and presented to the applicant for solutions. The questions are generally introduced with words or phrases like the following: what would you do if, or how would you handle, how would you solve, if assuming, and so on. Hypothetical questions for evaluation of reasoning abilities, thought process, values, attitude, creativity, work style, and one's approach to different tasks. Probing questions are questions that enable interviewers to delve more deeply for additional information. Best thought of as follow-up questions, they are usually short and simply worded. There are three types of probing questions. First, relational probes request reasons using short questions such as why, how, when, how much, or who. Second, clarifier probes are used to qualify or expand upon information provided in a previous response. They use such questions as what happened next, what caused this to happen. Third, and finally, verifier probes check out the honesty of a statement. For example, you state on your resume you currently work closely with the officers from your customers' firms. Please tell me exactly what you've done for them. And finally, close-ended questions are questions that may be answered in a single word, generally yes or no. Close-ended questions can be helpful in a number of ways. They give the interviewer greater control, put certain applicants at ease, are useful in seeking clarification, and are helpful if you need to verify information. Also, if there's a single issue that could terminate the interview, such as the absence of an important job requirement, then asking about it up front using direct close-ended questions can help you disclose and complete interviews more efficiently and effectively. Interviewers should avoid relying on close-ended questions for the bulk of their information, however. Except under certain circumstances, answers to closed-ended questions provide limited information, resulting in an incomplete picture of a person's abilities or experiences. Now let's take a look at questioning techniques for different stages of the interview process. Remember the 5 stages of competency-based interviewing: rapport building, introductory, core, confirmation, and closing. Competency-based questions can make up as much as 65% of the core stage and the entire 5% of the closing. The remaining 30% of the interview is divided between open-ended, hypothetical, probing, and closed-ended questions that we just discussed. The rapport building stage, representing a scant but important 2% of the interview, sets the tone for the rest of the meeting. The purpose is to put applicants at ease, thereby encouraging them to communicate opening and allowing you to determine job suitability. Closed-ended questions that are casual in nature and focus on non-job-related topics can accomplish this goal. Here are some examples of neutral, rapport-building closed-ended questions. Did you have trouble getting here? Were you able to find a parking spot nearby? How was the traffic? Isn't it a beautiful day? And so on. The introductory stage represents just 3% of the interview and is intended to accomplish 2 key objectives: to help still nervous applicants feel at ease, and to allow the interviewer to start assessing their job suitability. These objectives are best accomplished by posing 2 or 3 open-ended questions. This is the most effective type of question to ask at this stage because the applicant will begin talking and relax a bit more. While you actively listen to their responses, you can start making job suitability decisions. Introductory questions should be about topics familiar to the applicant, so as to not create undue pressure. One question that satisfies this criteria is, would you please describe your activities during a typical day at your current job? As the core stage implies, this is the most substantive segment of the interview. Here, the interview gathers all relevant information about the applicant based on the 4 categories of tangible skills, knowledge, behavior, and interpersonal skills. This stage represents 85% of the interview, with as much as 65% of it devoted to competency-based questions. That leaves about 20% of the time to be divided between the 4 other types of questions: closed-ended, open-ended, probing, and hypothetical. The last 2 should receive shared emphasis, say about 5% each, with open-ended questions receiving about 8% and closed-ended questions carrying the small balance. The confirmation stage offers the interviewer the opportunity to verify what she's learned thus far about the applicant's specific job competencies. It represents about 5% of the entire interview and should be divided between open and closed-ended questions, with a slightly heavier emphasis on open-ended. A competency-based question may occasionally be appropriate in the confirmation stage. And finally, the closing stage is the last chance stage of the interview. The interviewer can ensure coverage of all relevant competencies needed to make a screening or hiring decision, and the applicant has the opportunity to sell himself. It represents about 5% of the interview and should be devoted to competency-based questions such as, what additional examples of work with difficult customers could help me make a hiring decision? Or, what could you tell me about your work with an employee assistant program that illustrates your experience in this area? No matter the stage or type of question you're asking in an interview, there are some questioning techniques to avoid. There are 3 types of questions interviewers should avoid asking: those that yield trait responses, loaded questions, and leading questions. Applicants might provide trait responses during an interview that substitute for specific examples. This is likely to happen in a response to an open-ended question when the applicant lacks sufficient expertise or experience and is hoping to impress you. For example, if you were to ask, "What's your greatest strength?" the applicant might reply, "I excel at problem solving." Good question and good answer, right? Well, not really. What have you learned about the applicant? Absolutely nothing. If you want to know about a person's strength, try a 2-pronged approach. Ask the open-ended trait question first. Describe your greatest strength. And then follow up with a competency-based question. Give me an example of how you've used your greatest strength at your current job. Now, if the applicant says, "I excel at problem solving" in the response to the first question, she must back it up with a specific example. If she cannot back it up or rambles on with more rhetoric, you know she's giving you as much verbiage. Another type of question to avoid is the loaded or multiple choice questions. Applicants should never feel forced to choose between 2 or more alternatives. This kind of setup implies that the correct answer is among the options you've offered. The applicant is likely to feel intimidated, and you're apt to miss out on valuable information. Sometimes interviewers resort to loaded questions because they've lost control of the interview. If you want to regain control, ask a series of closed-ended questions and then return to more meaningful competency-based questions. Finally, leading questions. Another type of question to avoid is the leading question. This is one that implies there's a single correct answer. The interview sets up the question so the applicant provides the desired response. Here are some examples of what not to ask. You do intend to finish college, don't you? Don't you agree that most workers need to be watched very closely? Or finally, when you're in school, how much time did you waste taking art and music classes?